purpose of this video is to show you how to gather information from a static web page. It's not always the case that a website has a nice REST API behind it that we can call directly. So what we end up doing is fetching a web page and parsing the HTML in the page and extracting the information that we're interested in. And what we're going to start with is I'm going to grab a sample page so you can see what we're going to do. So this page has information about all the rooms in a building on a campus, and what I'm most interested in is the number of computer labs in each building. So all these pages have the same structure. There's a group of tables that identify the number of computer labs, classrooms, lecture theaters, meeting rooms, and so on. So what we're really interested in, just as a demonstration, is writing a program that is going to tell us how many computer labs there are in a given building. So the input to the program is going to be the URL for the page, and the output is just going to print out on the console the number of computer labs in that building. So in this case, if we expand this table, so for the A building there are many labs. I'm not going to count them up, but you get the idea. And so what we're really going to do is write a program that parses the HTML in this page and counts up the number of rows in the first table, or in the computer labs table. Okay, so let's get started. So we'll make a directory for this project and go into that directory, and we'll use npm init to initialize the project, and we'll just go with all the defaults. And we are going to use two packages to help out with this. We're going to use the Axios package, which allows us to fetch a web page remotely, and the HTML parser 2 package, which allows us to parse an HTML document. And so let's install those packages. And the next thing we're going to do is create an index.js file. And we're going to start with a simple program that just prints the title element for the page. So we're going to work our way up to counting the number of computer labs in a building. And I'll just explain what's going on in this little program. So we require the Axios and the HTML parser 2 packages. We are going to have this state variable in title. So as the parser moves through the HTML document, it triggers events when we enter a start tag or an attribute or the text of an element or the ending of a tag. And so we're going to use this flag state variable to let us know when we are inside the title element, because that's when we want to start paying attention to the content of elements. For all the other elements on the page, we don't really care, but when we're in the title element, we are interested in that content. So the parser is going to move its way through the HTML, and we start by assuming that we are not inside the title element. And then we have the parser, and so from the HTML parser 2 package, we create a new parser object. And the way the constructor for this object works is there is a couple of arguments to it, a couple of object arguments to it. The first object it contains a number of functions that are going to be triggered on various events as the document is parsed. In this case, I mean, there are about a dozen or so different events that we can key in on. In this case, we are really interested on when the parser is processing an open tag, the text for an HTML element, or the closing tag. And so we provide event handlers for those three particular events. And then the second parameter to the constructor is a list of options to be set for the parser. In this case, we set the decode entities property option to be true, indicating that whenever there's an escaped character, like in HTML, you would use ampersand LT semicolon for the less than symbol. And so we would like to have that decoded, turned into the proper character. So to decode the entities when they are being parsed. And so that sets up the parser. The next thing we do is we have a look at the command line arguments. So we need one command line argument, which is the URL of the page that we want to process. And so that's going to appear in actually the third position. The first argument is the call to node. The second argument is the name of the file that contains the script. And then the third argument are any other command line arguments that have been typed on the command line. And so we're going to, when we run this script, we are going to pass in the URL of the page that we are interested in. And so we use the Axios package. We use the get method to get or to retrieve a remote web page. And which page are we retrieving? It's the one that was passed on the command line. And if that is successful, we're going to get a response object back. And that response object has a data property which contains the content of that page, so the HTML markup for that page. And so if that succeeds and we have that content, then we are going to invoke a couple of methods on the parser. So up here we just constructed the parser object, but we're not actually doing any parsing yet. If we invoke the write method on the parser, that's what's going to start processing and parsing the data. And what we pass in, we can call the parser write method several times to add more data in to be parsed. And then at the end, we signal to the parser that there is no more data coming. And so as that data gets processed by the parser, it moves through the input text and triggers these event handlers each time one of those elements is encountered. So either an opening tag, the text inside a tag, or a closing tag. And the only thing we do in this particular case is, so we are interested in displaying to the user what the contents of the title tag for this document is. So if I go and look at this page, hopefully it's not too difficult to find. There it is there. There is the title element. So what we're doing in our script then is we're keying in on all of the opening tags, and basically what we do is every time there's an opening tag. So for example, if we look at the source of this page, there's the HTML tag, the head tag, a meta tag, a link tag, a script tag, and so on. Each one of those is going to trigger the open or on open tag event handler, but really the only one we're interested in is when we're on the opening tag of the title element. And so then what we do is this on open tag event handler is going to be called many, many times. What we do is we key in, it comes with two parameters, the name of the tag and also all the attributes that were present on the opening tag. In the case of the title element, we're really only interested in checking that the name is equal to title. So we're not going to be interested in the HTML or the meta element or the head element, any of that stuff. We're really just interested in the title element. So when the parser encounters the title element, then we set this state variable in title to be true. Because what we are going to want to do is on the next text event, we're going to know we're inside the title. So on the next text event, we can print out the contents of the title element, and that's exactly what we do. So in the on text event handler, it has a parameter which is the text of the corresponding element, but we don't want to handle the text of absolutely every element. We're only interested in the text of the title element. So we only print out the page title only when we know we're inside the title, when the in title state variable is set to true. And as soon as we do that, we log the page title. So the text here is the content of the title element. We print that out on the console. And then we do not want to see the content of any other element. And so we set the in title state variable to false. Really, these are the only two event handlers we need. I've got this third one in here on the closing tag, just to print out a message when we get to the end of the entire document. So this is an onClose tag event handler. The tag name comes in for that as well. We're really only interested in the closing HTML tag, and if we are closing that tag, then we just print this message at the end of the program. And you can see, so that will be triggered if we look at the source for the page. Well, this is a relatively lengthy page, but there should be at the bottom a closing HTML tag. And so when the parser reaches that, it is going to print out that message. Okay, so let's just try this out. And so we'll try it for the building A page. So there's the command. We're going to run node on the index.js file, and then we pass the URL that we are interested in. And so that fetches the page, parses it, and you can see here that it prints out the contents of the title element. And that's for the A building, and that matches exactly what we had in the source HTML. So there is the title element right there. So it just pulls out the contents of that single element. Okay, so now what we are really interested in doing is going back to this page. We are more interested in counting up the number of computer labs. And so you can see here there is a table with that information. And so the total number of computer labs is simply going to be the total number of rows in this table. So what we're going to have to do is set some state variables and add some more event handlers and start counting when we are inside the computer labs table. Count every row, and then when we get to the end of the table, stop counting and print out the result. In order to figure out exactly what to key in on, we would have to look at the source of the web page and see if there is any particular tag or attribute that is going to be of use to us. So there's a lot of HTML in this page, and let's just find out where that computer labs table is. Okay, so here it is. So there's the heading for the computer labs section, and here is the opening table tag. And what we're going to do is there is this class that I hope is pretty unique to these tables. So if I copy that and do a search for it, it appears 4 times in this page. So there's the second occurrence, third occurrence, fourth occurrence, and back to the first occurrence for that string. So I don't know how many tables there are in total in this page, but I know that these 4 tables with this class attribute contain the list of rooms in each category. So what we're going to do is we are going to key in on the table element with this particular class attribute set. And then once we've reached that point in parsing the document, then we'll start counting rows. And you'll see there'll be all the rows there. And eventually we will get to the end of that table. And so when we get to the end of the table, the closing table tag, we'll stop counting rows and print out the result. So that's what we're going to do. And so in order to do that, we're going to need a few more state variables. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a few more state variables at the top. And I need to know, so there are many tables in this page. I need to know whether I'm counting rows or not at any given point in time, because there are going to be many opening TR tags, and I want to make sure that I'm only counting rows in that first table that meets that criteria. So what we have is this count rows state variable or flag variable, which we set to false. So normally when we encounter a TR tag, we are not counting the rows until we are in the correct table. And also we know there are multiple tables in this page, with all the classrooms, the meeting rooms, the lecture theaters, and so on. We're only interested in the first table that has the computer lab information, and so we also have a flag or a state variable done so that we don't process the data in any of those other tables. And then finally, the third state variable we have is row count. So when we are in the correct table and we are counting rows up, we need to keep track of that somehow. So those are the 3 extra state variables that we're going to need. Then the next thing we need to do is figure out when we are inside the correct table and start counting rows. There is another event handler that we can use. So we know that, let's go to that table tag. So this table has this particular class attribute. In the parser object, there is another event handler that we can use, the onAttribute event handler. So I'm just going to add that in. And this event handler is triggered every time we are processing an attribute. So in a start tag, you can have multiple attributes, and so this event handler is going to be triggered every time we are processing an attribute for a start tag. And so this event handler takes 2 parameters: the name of the attribute and the value associated with the attribute. And I know that I'm interested in looking for a class attribute with that particular value. And so that's exactly what I do in the onAttribute event handler. So if the name is a class, so we're setting a class attribute, and the value has that particular value that we saw in the source text for the page, then we know we are in the table that is listing rooms, and we can start counting rows. And we kind of use the fact here that it's the first table that has that class attribute where we start counting. So that just makes it a little bit easier. It might be a little bit more complicated if it was the third table or the fourth table or the last table. But fortunately, it's the first one, so that makes it pretty easy. So when we encounter an element with this attribute, then we know that we can start counting. The second thing we need to do is every time we start a row, and we are in that count rows mode, that we increment the row count counter. So we already have an event handler for the open tag. It's already dealing with the title tag. So we're going to add an extra statement in there to deal with the TR tag. So I'll add that in. Okay, so now on an opening tag, if it's the title, we do one thing. If it is a TR start tag or opening tag and the count rows state variable or flag variable is set, then we increment the row count. So we know we've only set count rows if we're in the correct table, and then we start counting the rows. And then the last thing we need to do is key in on the closing table tag to print out the result and stop counting. So we already have an event handler for closing tags. Currently it's just keying in on the HTML closing tag. We also want to do something in the case of a closing table tag. So we'll add the code for that. And there it is. So we check the tag name is table. So we're on a closing table tag. And if we have been counting rows, and if the whole process is not done, not completed, so using the done flag variable, then we know we're at the end of that first table. We have counted up all the rows, and so now we can report out the number of computer labs in this building. And I'm reporting out the value of row count -1 because if you look at the actual table, there is a heading row as well. So that's going to be a TR element in addition to all the TR elements for the actual rooms. So our row count variable is going to be counting the heading row as well. So the actual number of computer labs is one less than that value. So we report that out, and then the last thing we do is set this done flag variable to be true. The reason for that is these other event handlers are going to trigger for the classrooms and the meeting rooms and the lecture theaters as well and continue to count those, but we don't want to report the data from those. So after we've finished the first table, we know we're done, because the computer labs are listed in the first table. And that's it. So we've saved that, and so I can rerun that application, and it will tell me that there are still prints out the title of the page and that there are 14 computer labs in that case. And maybe I should just count these to make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So it matches the number of rows in the table. And we could rerun this on other buildings as well. So these only change by one letter. So in the B building, 5 labs. In the C building, 1 lab. In the T building, 3 labs. Okay. And that is pretty much it for how you use the HTML parser to package. And obviously it's going to be a little bit different for every bit of information that you're trying to get out from a static page, but this is pretty much going to be the template. You'll have to set up appropriate event handlers, so those are pretty much standard. You are probably going to have one or more state variables or flag variables to control what parts of the document that you are really interested in. And then in these event handlers, you are probably going to have some guarded code, based on the value for one of these state variables or some of the parameters that come in for each event, like which tag it is or which attribute it is, and so on. But that's pretty much the pattern. So you write the parser event handlers, you create some state variables that are going to help you control which elements that you're looking at and which you're ignoring, and you extract the information that you're interested in. So that's pretty much it for using the HTML parser to package.